Let's take a look at this next example. We're going to be graphing the function y equals negative sine of 2x, and we want to go ahead and use transformations. So first let's talk about the negative sign out in front of our sine function. Remember that that's going to create a reflection over the x-axis. Which is the same thing as turning your graph upside down. And you can think of it as multiplying -1 times those y values. The 2 that is inside with the x is going to give us a horizontal compression. And in this case, we're going to be multiplying our x values times 1/2. So let's take a look at what happens with our graph. And we're going to go ahead and start with our sine function. Let's focus on the point pi over 2, 1, just like we did in the last example. Here we have the graph of our sine function, and I went ahead and labeled the point pi over 2, 1. Let's go ahead and look at what happens with our graph once we reflect it over the x-axis. Keep in mind we're going to be taking this graph and flipping it upside down. Here we have the graph of negative sine of x. And let's go ahead and take a look at what happens with that point pi over 2, 1. Remember, for this first reflection over the x-axis, we're going to be taking -1 times our y value. So here's our original point, and if we multiply our y value here by a -1, that's going to give us the point pi over 2, -1. So now you can see the graph of negative sine of x, and we have that point labeled on the graph. Now let's go ahead and look at our next transformation. Now we can go ahead and apply that horizontal compression to our graph. So we're going to be multiplying our x values by 1/2. So let's take a look at this x value here. We have pi over 2, and we're going to be multiplying this by a factor of 1/2. That's going to give us pi over 4 for our new x value. And our y value here is going to stay the same, so it's still going to be a -1. Our final graph, negative sine of 2x, is the one that you see graphed in blue. And I went ahead and labeled our point pi over 4, -1 on that graph so you can see where our point ended up. Now this looks a little bit messy. I'm going to go ahead and take the graph that was negative sine of x off so you can see just the original graph and our final graph. So here you see the original graph, which is our sine of x function, and our final graph that was reflected over the x-axis and then had that horizontal compression by a factor of 1/2 is the one that you see in blue. So that is y equals negative sine of 2x.